Everyone, good morning. Jessica Miller here. Hi. I'm going to talk about today my fourth jury trial. So, hold on, I've got things popping up on my screen. As you know, I am Jessica Miller. I'm a prosecutor here in Butte County, and I've decided I want to go through the trials that I've had in my life so that I can talk about with the public just some observations I have about jury trials in general and being a prosecutor. And I've gotten some feedback over the last couple weeks about how helpful this is to people who are either practicing law or in law enforcement. And so I'm just going to keep it up because I think that's good. I really think that talking about, as a prosecutor, the nuts and bolts of the jury trial process is a good way to talk about criminal law. So we'll just keep it up until I run out of trials, which at the rate I'm going will be never. So I wanted to get these done by the end of the year, but we're in November now, and I still have I think I have 30 something, almost 40 that I want to do. So we'll just keep going slowly but surely. So number 4, I posted the link to the blog post about my fourth jury trial already. I will put it in the comments here as well. I titled it The Jury Trial Without a Victim. Mostly this was my introduction into domestic violence in the court system. This was I'll just give you a brief factual basis. This was a defendant who was a female. She had been, the victim was male. She had been dating her boyfriend dating and living together for 22 years. They had recently broken up, but they were living on the same property. She lived in the house. He had moved out to a mobile home. On this particular evening, the female defendant, she was upset with our victim because of some disagreement about how he was treating his adult son. And she didn't agree with his lack of sympathy, and so she went to our victim's motorhome to confront him about it. When he told her to leave, she did not. She got upset, and she grabbed the victim by the jacket and held on to him, and our victim then punched her, which caused a laceration on the chin. The defendant also scratched the victim's face when she grabbed onto him, causing him to bleed. But that was about it. So this is what we call misdemeanor level battery. There was just two relatively minor injuries on both of the parties. Neither of them had any criminal history to speak of. And so it came in, and it was charged appropriately as a misdemeanor. Now, jury trials, when it comes to domestic violence, can be very tricky. We have victims who, it's just hard. It's just hard to come to court and to talk about a very personal relationship and a very negative time in the relationship. And so I outline this in my blog, but there's a couple things that can happen with victims. And so in domestic violence, we learn that we have to be prepared in advance for any scenario. Sometimes victims don't show up. The pressure is just too much. They don't want to deal with having to come and testify in front of their former loved one and talk about, with strangers, violence that occurred, usually behind closed doors. Sometimes victims, and often victims, will change their stories because the realities of having an incarcerated loved one come to reality. I could have said that better, but it's hard when you separate a family. All of a sudden, you have the breadwinner, the person who is supporting the family, who is providing support to help raise children. There's no negative contact, and you can't see each other, and you have to, or one is in prison, and one is in jail, and one is not. And so those pressures, those real life pressures, come into play, and sometimes stories get changed. Sometimes we don't get the whole story at the outset. And so over time, as victim advocates in our office and defense counsel work with the parties, we learn other facts. And so there's a whole bunch of things that can happen. Victims can come on the stand and change their stories. They will lie. They will lie for their defendants because they don't want them in trouble. Victims will come to court and decline to testify. So there's just a variety of things. In this case, our victim had relocated way out of the state, and we had elected not to bring him in because the cost, the crime versus the cost. So we did not bring our victim in. We relied on defendant's own statements about what happened. We relied on some photos, and then there was I think that was it. Photos, defendant's statements to law enforcement. Defendant in this case took the stand and explained to the jury what had happened inside her home prior to her going to our victim's home. And that was, she claimed that he had pushed her and scratched her and injured her in the home prior to her going to our victim's mobile home. And that was something that I just couldn't overcome. I couldn't rebut in any way because I didn't have a victim present to explain to me what happened prior to the mobile home incident. So we go through the trial. Defense puts its case on, puts the defendant on. I remember, this is my 4th jury trial, and it was one of those cases where the defense attorney decided to get very dramatic at his closing argument. And I just remember being shocked because I'm sitting there listening, and he turns and he slams his hands on the table in front of me and says, "This is government overreaching." And it was like a little bit dramatic for the type of trial that we were in. And I remember thinking, I'm looking at the jury, and everyone seemed equally kind of shocked at the level of drama that was going on. But we got through closing arguments, and the jury goes back to start deliberating, and we had a long-time retired judge who he served in our county for years and years, but he was a visiting judge. And as soon as that door closed on the alternate juries, he said, "Well, this is going to take long." Told us just to stay put. And he was right, 10 minutes. Took 10 minutes for that not guilty verdict. So it was a good one. I learned a lot about self-defense. So this was a case where ultimately our defendant claimed that she was acting in self-defense. And in terms of assaultive crimes, as a prosecutor, I have to be able to disprove that the defendant acted in self-defense. Now, in this case, you don't get to create the situation where force is necessary, right? You don't get to you don't get to go to a location looking for a fight and then claim self-defense. Another thing that we have to look at in terms of self-defense is the amount of force used reasonable to what is going on? So those are things, and this trial in particular taught me, you have to evaluate pre-filing, what's going on with that, and make sure you have an answer, because if you don't have an answer, you don't have reasonable doubt. I mean, you do have reasonable doubt. Other way around. So after this trial, I can remember, and I still do, every single assaultive crime that I'm reviewing for charges, I go through an analysis of self-defense to make sure that pre-filing, we know with certainty that the actions were not self-defense. So this was a good one in terms of learning for me. It was a difficult one in terms of having to try it, but we got through it. So, and I learned a lot about the roller coaster that is domestic violence in terms of a trial. So, but they're important. That's why I think as a prosecutor, we're willing to take on the uncertainty of domestic violence cases, is because those are the cases that we have victims who are most vulnerable. They happen behind closed doors, and they are cyclical. And so if we can get in there and stop a domestic violence relationship before it turns into something heinous, we do. And hopefully we've been successful at our office in doing that on occasion. This one, not so much. But fortunately, this couple had broke up and they live in separate states now, so we're good. Next week, we'll be moving on. I want to do 2 next week, so fingers crossed for me that I get 2 done next week. Again, keep reaching out to me if you got specific questions. I'm happy to talk to you about them. Thank you for watching my video, and I will talk to you soon. Again, Jessica Miller, and have a good weekend. Bye.